The first time I almost told Paige Holloway I was in love with her, I was standing in her kitchen at 11:30 on Tuesday night, holding a half-empty bag of frozen peas against my knuckles because I'd put my hand through her broken cabinet door, trying to fix the latch, and she was laughing so hard she had to sit down on the floor. I said, "This is your fault," she said. "You volunteered. Because you said it was a loose screw. It was several loose screws." She pressed her lips together. "And also the hinge was rusted through." That would have been useful information before I punched the cabinet. You didn't punch it. You leaned on it with your full body weight and lost an argument with wood. I looked at her, sitting cross-legged, on the linoleum in her socks, with that particular smile she had when something had gone exactly wrong enough to be funny. And I thought something true that I wasn't ready to say. So instead I said, "Your kitchen is a liability." She reached up and adjusted the frozen peas against my hand. "My hero." That was 2 years before any of this. "My name is Seth. I'm 31, a site supervisor for a mid-sized construction crew in Hamilton, Ontario, which means I spend most of my days explaining to subcontractors why the concrete specs are not suggestions and then explaining to clients why the timeline they found on YouTube is not realistic. I am good at reading blueprints, managing schedules, not flinching when things go sideways, and pretending not to notice when Paige Holloway pushes her hair off her face and I temporarily forget what province I live in. Paige and I had been best friends since we were 23, both working summer contracts through the same temp agency. She'd ended up filing permits at a civil engineering office. I'd ended up fetching coffee and running errands for a foreman who later became my boss. We met at the agency's mandatory orientation on a Wednesday morning when the facilitator asked everyone to share one professional strength, and Paige said, without a trace of irony, "I never let anything stay broken." Then she glanced sideways at me and added, "Also, I make excellent coffee and I'm not above bribery." I was done for right there. She was the kind of person who remembered exactly how you took your coffee 6 months after you'd told her once, who could look at a room full of strangers and find the one who needed someone to talk to, who laughed at her own jokes a half-second before the punchline because she couldn't help it. She'd finished a landscape architecture program at Mohawk. She drove a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked passenger mirror and a reusable coffee mug in every cup holder. She went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings like it was a spiritual practice. She had a plant named Gerald that she worried about whenever the heat came on too early. For 8 years, I had done what any man terrified of losing the best is lie does. I lied. Not out loud. Out loud I was fine. Out loud I called her Holloway and said things like, "You're the most organized disaster I've ever met, and no jury in Ontario would convict you." When people asked why we'd never dated, I said, "Because Paige has standards and I have a fantasy hockey league." People laughed. Paige always smiled, but sometimes in the split second after the joke landed, something would move across her face that I couldn't name. Not sadness, more like she'd reached for a handle and found out the door wasn't there. I didn't let myself think about that too long. Last December, her dad had a cardiac event. He was 64, retired from the steel plant, in the middle of watching the Leafs lose when it happened. He survived, but the recovery was long and her parents lived in Stony Creek. And her brother was in Fort McMurray chasing oil money, so Paige became the point person overnight. She was driving out every second evening, coordinating with the rehab team, sorting out her dad's medication schedule and arguing with insurance on the phone in the parking lot of her office building, because that was the only place she could pace without someone watching. I started showing up. First, it was practical. I drove her to the hospital the night it happened because she called me before she called anyone else, and I didn't ask why, I just grabbed my keys. I brought food because her parents' fridge was full of things that needed to be cleared out and replaced with things her dad could actually eat post-procedure. I fixed the ice maker in her parents' kitchen because it had been broken for 3 years, and now that her dad was home, small annoyances felt large. She told me once, standing in the hospital corridor while her dad was in with the physiotherapist, "You don't have to keep coming." I leaned against the wall. "The coffee here is genuinely terrible. I don't know why I keep returning." She almost smiled. "Seth, I want to come." I kept my voice level. "Let me come." She nodded and looked at the floor and didn't say anything else, which was how I knew she needed it more than she could say. Somewhere between December and February, something shifted. She stopped performing around me. I saw her cry in the car on the way home from a particularly rough appointment, not making a sound, just tears running while she watched the highway. I saw her fall asleep on her parents' couch, still holding a printed-out medication schedule with her reading glasses pushed up on her head. I saw her be exhausted and scared and grateful and sharp and sad in the space of 20 minutes, and I saw her pull herself together when she walked through her parents' door, like she was doing it for them, even when she had nothing left. One night after her dad had his first real good day, she sat at her kitchen table and said, "I don't know how to do this. You're doing it. I'm winging it constantly. That's what doing it is." She looked at me. "How are you so calm?" "I'm not. I just project calm professionally." She laughed, and her eyes went wet, and she stood up and hugged me the way you hug someone when what you really mean is thank you for being here, even when I didn't know how to ask you to be. Her face was against my shoulder. Her hands were pressed flat against my back. I stood there holding her and staring at the light above her kitchen table and reminding myself that she was scared and tired, and this was comfort, not a signal. I was very focused on being good. After that, Paige looked at me differently. Or maybe I just started noticing. In April, her friends from her Mohawk cohort rented a cottage near Wasaga Beach for a long weekend. She asked me to come because, in her words, if I go alone, Brittany's going to try to set me up with her boyfriend's coworker again, and last time he spent 40 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to me like I was the problem. So I went as her backup. At least, that's what I told myself. The cottage was one of those places that looked better in the listing photos than in person, with a dock that listed slightly to the left and a propane barbecue that required a ritual to light. There were 6 of us. Her friends were fine. Her friend Caro was the one I liked best, the one who asked real questions and then actually listened to the answers. Her friend Brittany was exactly what Paige had described. Brittany's boyfriend Kirk genuinely did believe volume was a form of charisma. Saturday evening, we were on the dock watching the sun go down over Georgian Bay. Paige was sitting beside me, her knees pulled up, and she was eating the last of the salt and vinegar chips directly from the bag, which she had been doing since we were 24, and which I had never once successfully objected to. Kirk said from his lawn chair, "You know what you two are? You're basically common law." Paige said, "Kirk, no, seriously, you showed up in the same car. You finished each other's sentences at dinner. He handed you a sweater before you said you were cold." "He's observant," Paige said. "That's just what he's like." "That's not what that is," Caro said, and she looked at me when she said it. I should have made a joke. I had several ready. Instead, I looked at Paige in the low orange light with the chip bag in her lap and Georgian Bay going pink behind her, and I felt something climb up through my chest that I had been keeping in a very orderly container for 8 years. Caro said, "Just say it." Paige turned to look at me at the exact same moment I turned to look at her. I said, "Before I could locate my better judgment, I'm pretty sure I'm in love with you." The dock went quiet. A loon called somewhere out over the water. Brittany made a small sound. Paige stared at me. I added, with what I can only describe as catastrophic instinct, "But also you've eaten the last of the chips, and I think that's a crime." Kirk said, "Oh my God." Paige's mouth opened. Then she looked at the bag, then back at me. Her cheeks had gone the color of the sky behind her, and she leaned in and whispered, "What did you just say? The chip thing?" "I stand by the chip thing." She grabbed my arm. "Seth, the first part." She held on. Her fears were very certain. "Say it again." That was the moment. The one where everything I'd been carefully maintaining for 8 years stopped being manageable. My name. She already knew. She'd been saying it for 8 years, and I had never once gotten tired of it. I'm 31, and I had just told my best friend I was in love with her in front of 4 people on a dock in Wasaga Beach, and she was asking me to say it again like she needed to hear the shape of it to know if it was real. I said, "I'm in love with you." That was the first part. Paige let go of my arm and stood up and said, "Walk with me." Caro said very quietly, "Go." The dock led to a narrow path along the waterfront. The party noise faded behind us until it was just the water and the sound of our shoes on the gravel and the particular silence that sits between 2 people who have just changed the rules. Paige walked fast and then stopped near a rocky outcrop where the water came right up to the shore. She turned around. For a moment, we just looked at each other in the way you look at someone when the thing you've been not saying is suddenly out in the open air, and the air has not caught fire, which is both a relief and a problem. She said, "How long?" Not a question, a direction. "Paige, don't." Her voice was steady. "I've earned a straight answer." I looked at the water. The sun was low enough now that the bay was doing something unreasonable with color. "A while." "How long is a while?" "Since the cabinet." She went very still. "The cabinet in my kitchen. You were sitting on your floor laughing and I was holding a bag of frozen peas and I thought something that I wasn't prepared to say." She stared at me. "That was 2 years ago." "I know. Before that, did you?" She stopped. "How long, Seth?" I looked at her. She had the same expression she used when a contractor gave her an estimate that didn't add up, and she was waiting politely for him to correct it. "Patient. Certain. Impossible to redirect." "Since the orientation," I said. "The temp agency. When you said you don't let things stay broken." Her mouth opened. "And then you told me how you took your coffee, and you remembered how I took mine the next day without asking." And I thought, that's going to be a problem. That was 8 years ago. She sat down on a rock. She looked at the water. I waited because I had said the thing, and there was no taking it back, and I didn't want to take it back, and I was genuinely terrified. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were the best thing in my life, and I didn't want to make it weird or put something on you that you couldn't return, and then have every time we got coffee be different. I didn't want to be the reason you stopped calling, so you decided to just." She waved one hand. "Quietly love me for 8 years. I was being your friend." She looked at me, and something in her expression did something complicated. "You were always that." Her voice was quieter now. "You didn't have to disappear inside it to do it." I didn't have an answer. Because she was right. And because her hair was moving in the wind off the water. And because I had just told the truth after 8 years and my body didn't quite know what to do with the surplus. She looked down at her hands. Then she said, "When my dad was in the hospital, when you drove me there and brought food and fixed my parents' ice maker that no one else had even noticed was broken." She paused. "I started thinking about you differently." "Differently how?" "Like." She pressed her lips together. "Like I was looking at a photograph I'd seen 100 times and I suddenly saw what was actually in it." My chest did something involuntary. "Paige." I didn't know what to do with it. She looked up. "Because it was you. And you're the person I call. You're the one I called first when Dad went to the hospital. Not my brother. Not Caro. You. And I started being scared that I'd noticed something and you hadn't, and I'd have to spend the rest of my life pretending I didn't." The water moved. Somewhere behind us, Kirk laughed loudly at something. "I noticed," I said. She looked at me. "I've been noticing for a long time." I sat down on the rock beside her. "I just didn't know if you." I couldn't tell if what I was seeing was real, or just something I wanted to see. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When you handed me the sweater." Before I said I was cold. "Yeah, I noticed that." Her voice was careful. "I noticed it, and I thought he always does that." And then I thought, why does he do that? And then I thought something I wasn't ready to think. "What did you think?" She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, or hadn't let myself see. Scared and something warmer underneath it. The way a window looks from outside when all the lights are on inside. I thought, I think I want him to do that forever. The bay went completely still, or I stopped being able to hear it. I said, "Paige." "I know," she said. "I know that's terrifying." "It's not." She looked uncertain. "We've been friends for 8 years. We have habits and history, and I know exactly how you organize your truck, and you know I stress bake focaccia when I'm overwhelmed. And what if we try this and we can't find our way back to what we—" I took her hand. "Just that." She stopped talking. "I don't want to go back," I said. "I want to go forward, but not fast. However slow you need." She looked at our hands. Then she looked at me. "I don't want slow." Her voice was very quiet. "I think I've been going slow by accident for 2 years and I'm tired of it." I laughed. One of those laughs that comes out when you feel something too large for your chest. "Okay, okay, okay." I turned toward her. "Can I?" She kissed me, not dramatically. Her hand came to my jaw and she kissed me like she'd thought about it and decided, which I would later learn was exactly how Paige did everything. The water was behind us, and the dock lights were coming on in the distance, and after 8 years, it turned out the truth felt almost weightless once you let it out. When she pulled back, she kept her hand on my face for a moment and said, "You're not going to make a joke right now." "I have one ready. Do not. It's a good one." "Seth, okay." I turned my face and kissed her palm. "No joke," she exhaled. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat on the rock while the bay went dark and the cottage lights flickered on behind the trees. Caro sent a text that said, "Please eat dinner, we made burgers. Also, we're all very happy for you. Also, Kirk owes Britt $20. Paige showed me and said, they had a bet. Did you know? I had a feeling." She paused. "I kept telling myself I was imagining it. You weren't. I know that now." She tucked her phone away. I didn't want to be wrong about this one. We went back and ate burgers on the deck with her friends, while Kirk did not stop grinning, and Caro refilled everyone's drinks. And Brittany asked, twice, whether we'd talked about this before. And Paige said, "We're talking about it now," in a voice that closed the subject politely but completely. That night, I lay on the cottage's pull-out couch, and I did not sleep at all, and I didn't mind. The drive back to Hamilton was on Sunday afternoon, with the windows down because the May weather couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Warm in the sun and cool in the shade. The highway stretching out past the escarpment with the radio on low. Paige sat in the passenger seat with her feet up on the dash the way she always did, and the cracked mirror on her side of the car kept catching the light wrong. She said, at some point near Burlington, "I keep waiting for this to feel strange." "Does it?" She looked at me. "No, that's what's strange." I kept my eyes on the highway. "For me either. We've been doing this for 8 years," she said. "The driving and the coffee and showing up. We've just been." She stopped. "Doing it without saying it." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "I wasted a lot of time being scared." "You weren't wasting it," I said. "You were being my friend. That was never nothing." She looked out the window. Her hand was resting on the center console, not quite touching mine. Then it was. Her fingers settled over my hand on the gear shift, light and deliberate. We drove the rest of the way home like that. The first actual date was a Thursday. She chose the restaurant, an Italian place on James Street North that she'd been wanting to try for months. I wore a clean shirt and arrived 3 minutes early and stood outside for 2 of those minutes, trying to remember how to be a person who was not her best friend, but was also entirely her best friend. She showed up in a dark blue dress and boots I hadn't seen before, and I understood for the first time why people said their breath was taken. Because mine went somewhere. "You're staring," she said. "I'm allowed," I said. "New rules." She went slightly pink and held the door open for me. "Get in." We were bad at dating for about the first 20 minutes. I asked if she'd been here before, and she said no, and then said, "Obviously. I told you I wanted to try it." And then we both started laughing because we already knew everything and also nothing at all. She asked what I'd been up to that week, and I said, "You know, you texted me 4 times," and she covered her face with the menu. "We're disasters," she said. "Always have been." After that, we started asking questions we'd never let ourselves ask. She asked what I'd thought when I first met her. I said, "That you were going to be exhausting and worth it." She said, "That's very diplomatic." "I also thought you were the most confident person I'd seen in a long time. You walked into that room like you already knew what you were there for." She looked down at her water glass. I was terrified. I had $43 in my account, and my student loan payment was in 9 days. "You couldn't tell. I've spent a lot of energy not letting you tell things." She looked up. "I think I can stop now." Her hand was on the table. I reached across and covered it. "You can stop." She turned her hand over and held mine. "I thought you were kind," she said. "That first day. You held the elevator for everyone, even the guy who didn't say thank you. And at lunch, you asked the woman at the agency desk how her weekend was and actually waited for the answer." She paused. I remember thinking, he's going to be easy to be around. That ended up being a problem. Easy to be around was a problem? Easy to love was a problem, she said, and then she looked at her plate like she was surprised she'd said it. I didn't let her look away long. "Hey." She looked up. "I'm easy to love," I said. "You should lean into it." She laughed and threw her napkin at me, and the restaurant carried on around us, not knowing that everything was different. After dinner, we walked along the waterfront trail. While the Hamilton Harbor did its industrial beautiful thing, the grain elevators and the bridge lights reflecting off the water, the smell of the lake coming in. She walked close enough that our shoulders kept touching. She went quiet near the water's edge. Where'd you go? I said. She looked at the harbor. I didn't interrupt. Not of you. Of us. Of us not working and losing what we have. Of needing you too much and then you seeing that and it being. She stopped. I've watched people I love become different people to each other over time. My parents almost didn't make it, and I think I was protecting this. Protecting you, us, the way we are. Because what we have already is the best thing in my life, and I didn't want to be the one who broke it by wanting more. I stepped closer. Paige, I have been in love with you for 8 years. I drove to Stony Creek in a January ice storm to fix your parents' ice maker. I am not leaving. She looked at me. You can't promise that. I can promise that I'm choosing this consciously, knowing what it costs if it goes wrong, and I'm choosing it anyway. I'm not here because it's easy. I'm here because it's you, and there isn't a version of my life I want that doesn't have you in it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I'm choosing you too. Even scared, that's the only kind of choosing that counts, I said. She stepped into me and I held her by the harbor while Hamilton did its ordinary evening thing around us. A couple walking a dog, a cyclist, the light on the water, everything continuing normally while my entire life reorganized itself around the woman in my arms. She tilted her head back after a while. Okay, what? Okay, I want to go for more of these dates. This. She gestured vaguely between us. This version of us. I want to do it properly. No more almost. She said it simply. I'm tired of almost. I kissed her there next to the harbor. No cottage dock to hide behind. No rock to sit on. No friends watching from a distance. Just Paige choosing not to pretend anymore, and me finally brave enough to let her mean it. She smiled against my mouth and said, You can make the joke now if you need to. I said, You still owe me chips. She laughed so hard she had to hold on to my jacket. The practical complications came slowly, and then all at once. We told people individually rather than announcing anything, which Paige preferred, and which I understood, because Paige has always moved carefully with things that matter. Caro already knew. Her parents found out 2 weeks later, when I came for Sunday dinner, and her dad shook my hand at the door and said, About time. Her mom hugged me in the kitchen and then immediately asked if I wanted to stay for leftovers, which is the highest form of approval in that household. My sister texted me a string of emojis when I told her, followed by, I've been waiting for this since you described her at Christmas 2 years ago. I had not realized I described her that specifically. Apparently, I had. The first time we disagreed properly, it was about me making a decision on her behalf. She had a work conflict on a Saturday. We'd planned a day trip to Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I'd canceled the reservation without asking because I thought she'd be too tired, and she came home to find it done and went very quiet, which is worse than arguing. She said, I can decide what I need. I said I was trying to make it easier. She said, I know. But making it easier for me isn't the same as asking me. She paused. I'm not one of your job sites, Seth. You can't project manage me. I apologized properly, no deflection, no joke to soften it. She wasn't angry by the next morning, but the conversation stayed with me because she was right. There's a difference between showing up and taking over, and I had not fully understood where that line was. We rescheduled the trip. She picked the restaurant. I picked the winery. We split the bill and argued cheerfully about whether the rosé had been worth it. And on the drive back, she fell asleep against the window, and I drove the whole way home without the radio on, so I wouldn't wake her. The first time, she left toothbrush at my place. She acted like she hadn't. I didn't say anything for 3 days. Then I bought her the kind she prefers and put it next to mine, and when she noticed, she said, Oh, very quietly, and that was that. She cried at a Tim Hortons commercial in October, the one about the grandfather teaching his granddaughter hockey. I watched her try to pretend she hadn't and then watched her give up pretending. I know, she said. You know what? That it's a Tim Hortons ad. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it. I was thinking it was very well made, I said. Emotionally manipulative. Effective. She wiped her eyes. Shut up. Gerald probably cries at that one, too. She looked at me. You're terrible. You love me. She went still for just a second. Then she smiled, not the polite one, or the laughing one, or the one she used when something was only sort of funny. The real one. The one I'd been keeping track of for 8 years without meaning to. Yeah, she said. I do. It was the first time she'd said it directly. No almost, no qualifier. Just the truth, said plainly. In my living room in October, with a Tim Hortons ad on the TV and Gerald in the corner, probably also in his feelings. I said good. And then because I was still me, I said, say it again. She looked at me for a second like she was deciding something. Then she grabbed my collar with both hands and pulled me down and set it against my mouth before she kissed me, quiet and certain. I love you. Gerald did not react. The commercial ended. Outside it started raining, the particular Hamilton October rain that comes sideways off the lake and makes you glad to be inside. I held on to her and let myself want the future out loud. Not the dramatic version. Not the one with the swelling music. The version where she stress bakes focaccia on Saturday mornings, and I find it on the counter when I wake up. The version where Gerald gets repotted in the spring, and she sends me a photo with a caption that says, he's thriving. The version where we drive to Stony Creek on Sundays, and her dad tells me about whatever the Leafs did wrong, and her mom sends us home with containers of food. We definitely did not need, and we definitely eat on the couch anyway. She fell asleep against my shoulder around 11. Her hand was open on my chest, relaxed, like even in sleep she'd reached for me without thinking about it. I didn't move. The rain kept coming off the lake. The apartment was warm. Everything was very ordinary, and that was the whole point. That was what I had wanted, without knowing how to want it. I'd spent 8 years being careful not to ask for too much. That night I let myself, and the thing I'd kept folded up and tucked away for all that time turned out. Once I let it open to have been the whole story. She still eats the last of the chips. I've never once successfully objected. She knows this, and she does it anyway, and she hands me the bag when it's empty with a look that says I'd do it again. I've started buying 2 bags. She started hiding one for herself before I can get to it. We both pretend not to know that the other one knows. The joke was never really about the chips. It was always about this.